looper we're going to thread is the lower looper, which is indicated with our blue thread colors. So we're going to simply pull the blue thread off of the cone, slide it into our first guide on the antenna. Then you'll notice that there's an additional guide towards the back of the machine that lays flat against the machine. We're going to simply slide our thread into that guide and it will click into place. Now this is our tension disc, and this is what they call a lay-in tension disc. And it simply does exactly what it said. You just simply lay that thread into that tension disc, and the discs have grabbed that thread. They enclose on that thread. Now, in order to see the rest of our threading guides for the lower looper, we're going to need to open our front cover. And to do that, you'll notice there's a little imprint on that front cover. You're simply going to grab in that position, slide the front cover to the right, and then pull it down, and now we have our exposed area. You can immediately see that we have a threading chart here, and what's great about this threading chart is it tells us exactly where we need to go. So since we're blue, we're going to simply follow all of our blue markings. Here's our first guide here. We're going to pass that thread through there, and then we're going to come over here and you can see one more guide right there. Now at this point, once we have the thread in that guide, is that blue dot, we can't see the rest of our looper threading. So we are going to go ahead and open what we call the working table or the sewing table. You'll notice that there's a silver lever right here. We're going to simply pull that down and we're going to pull this table to the left. And immediately you can see that this whole entire area for both our lower looper and our upper looper is exposed. Now the lower looper is identified right here. And if we look at our threading guide, you can see that we have one more guide that we have to thread before we can thread that eye of that looper, but I can't see it. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to rotate that hand wheel towards me so that I can see the back half of that lower looper. I've got one guide right here. I'm going to slide that thread right into that guide, and then on the back half, that thread actually slides up into that guide. You're going to pull that thread up into that guide. Now my last portion of the lower looper to thread is actually the eye of my lower looper, and you can see the eye right there. I'm going to go ahead, I've got a thread tail that's a little longer than what I want. It's a little harder to manage, so I'm going to simply clip that thread tail, and I'm going to pass the thread through the eye of that looper. And if you need to, when you're doing this, it's okay to use tweezers to help you pull that thread through. So now that I've got the thread through the eye of the looper, I'm going to simply go ahead and I'm going to pull that thread back. So now our lower looper is threaded and we're ready to go ahead and thread the upper looper. To thread the upper looper, again, we're going to match right now at this point our color on the front of the machine with our thread color, and we're going to take it to that first guide on our antenna. And again, here is a flat guide towards the back of the machine. Slide that thread underneath that guide and you'll hear it click into place. Now we have a lay-in tension disc system for the upper looper and also for the lower looper, and the thread just simply lays in between those two tension discs, and you can feel the tension disc grab that thread. So our thread is in our tension disc, and our next guide is located right here. If we look at our threading chart, you can see that the lower looper is going to sit here and the upper looper is going to sit in this guide. We're going to pop that thread into that guide by sliding it to your left. Let's find our next green position, which is located right here. We're going to slide that thread up and it slides into place. Now our next guide shows that it's right here, and it's a little tricky. It actually is this position right here, and to grab that thread in there, what I have found is that if I come to the left and wrap it around, it will slide in underneath this little spring located right there. So now I'm ready to thread the eye of the looper, and I'm just going to turn the hand wheel a little bit to remove that lower looper thread and so that I can see the eye of the looper. Again, if you need to use tweezers, it's okay to grab a set of tweezers to go ahead and pull that thread through that eye. And once you've got it pulled through, you have your lower looper threaded in addition to your upper looper. Now we're ready to thread the needles. To thread our needles, we're actually going to start with our right needle. And we'll again notice that our color coding says that we are orange. We're going to grab our thread tail from our orange cone and we're going to take it through that first guide on our antenna. Now we're going to take our thread down to this position here on the left, and that thread just slides right into position. You'll notice in this case our tension dials are not what we call lay-in. They're actually a term that I was always told called beehive tension dials, because they kind of wrap around. We're going to take our thread to the right underneath. We're going to bring it all the way to the top, and then we're going to bring it down. And when we bring that down, we catch it in what we call a little check spring. And you can see as I pull the thread, I've got tension on that thread. Another way to thread the right needle, following the instructions in the manual, we're going to take the thread to our thread antenna, go to the right-hand side of our pre-tension threading guide. Then we're going to slide the thread through that hole on the left side of that pre-tension guide. This is all outlined in your instruction manual for the Baby Lock Vibrant. Now we're going to go through that tension disc, come up and around, and then we're going to finish by threading the needle. You'll notice that through several of the videos, we threaded on the left side of this pre-tension dial, not using the loop method. You may find that you can use one method over the other, and that really will depend upon the thread and the actual stitch or the technique that you're using. Now, if we look at our threading chart inside the front cover of our machine, we'll notice that when we bring that thread down, we have a guide right here that we're going to take that thread underneath, and then we have another hook we're going to take that thread up and over. Okay, so we came underneath and then we came up and over. Now, right above the needle, there is another guide, and because we're using the right needle, we're going to use the right-hand side of the guide, and the thread goes behind and simply clicks into place. Now we're ready to thread that needle. And again, I've got a little bit longer length of thread than what I would like, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that thread tail. It will make it a little easier for me to thread the eye of the needle. And this might be a case where you might want to use a pair of tweezers so that you can see the eye of the needle, or you can actually place that thread a little bit closer. Now that I have the thread through the eye of the right needle, I'm going to simply take that thread and pull it towards the back. And again, if you have difficulty getting your fingers or your hands in there, tweezers are always a great option to use. I'm just going to straighten that thread out. To thread the left needle, we're going to follow the same steps that we used for the right needle. Again, we have a red thread color indicator on our left needle. Take the thread up through the guide on the antenna. We're going to bring our thread to the guide on the front of the machine, slide it from the left to the right. We're going to come to the right of that tension disc or tension dial, underneath towards the top, and bring it around to catch it in that little spring. And just like with the right needle, we're going to follow the instruction in the manual for an alternative or another method to threading those needles. Come up through the thread antenna, and we're going to come to the right hand side of our pre-tension guide. Again, we're going to slide that thread through that hole. Now we're going to thread the tension disc. We're in place, and then we will thread our needle. Again, always make sure that you test to see if you need to use the threading method based on the instruction manual, or just using one side of that pre-tension guide. Whatever way gives you the best stitch. Now again, if we look at the threading guide on the front cover of our machine on the inside, it indicates that the thread for the left needle needs to go under this guide too. We're going to come up and around. Now we're going to place the thread behind the guide that sits above the left needle by sliding it behind and towards us, and now we're ready to thread that needle. I always like to make sure that when I'm threading a needle, I don't have a lot of thread, because it makes it a little bit more difficult when I'm trying to place that thread through the eye of that needle. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to place that through the eye of the needle, and once we have it through the eye of the needle, we'll simply pull it back. So my thread's through that eye. I'm going to grab that red thread, pull it to the back, and our machine is all threaded. And we're ready to start our first set of techniques.